Hey, yeah, Abe, how's it going? Guess who? Well, it's me, Uncle Murray. Who'd you think it was, Goofy? You know, I sure do miss reading your letters, kid. If you don't get your glasses soon, we're gonna have to find a way for you to tell me about what's been going on with you. Hey, maybe your mother could write the letters for you. Nah, that's no good. Then you couldn't tell me no secrets. Well, we'll figure something out. So who can I tell yous about today? Let me think. Uh, oh, good grief. I got ketchup on my shirt. I've been walking around since lunch with ketchup all over my shirt from that hot dog on my... Oh, hey! I know who I could tell you about. I could set you straight about Cinderella. You remember how I told you that Sprockets kicked his wife Betsy out of the house to go live with the widowed twin sister Betsy? Well, how about I tell you how Betsy met her late husband Hank? Oh, you'll love this one, kid. Okay, now Betsy and Betsy come from a real small family, see? They had a father and mother, Tom and June Weenie, and an older sister, Dolores. Now, Dolores was adopted, but Betsy and Betsy were June's twins, and they was the same age, but they was born 2 years apart. And don't ask me how that works, because I don't know. Well, even though Betsy and Betsy were twins, Betsy was born with one leg much shorter than the other. Or was it one leg longer than the other? I can never remember. Anyway, Dolores and Betsy used to give her a real hard time about her leg. They'd make fun of her and call her names, and they wouldn't let her hang out with them and their friends when they was playing. And when Betsy started going to school, the other kids noticed how her sisters were treating her, and some of them nicknamed them the Meanie Weenies. Totally fitting, if you ask me. Yeah, Betsy and Dolores really put Betsy through the ringer. Like on Halloween, when they'd all get back from trick-or-treating, Betsy and Dolores would take all the good stuff from Betsy and leave her with all the stuff that nobody ever wanted. You know, like Sen and Bit of Honey and Mary Jane's and gunk like that. And then, to add insult to injury, they'd throw all the nasty candy into the fireplace, and Betsy would have to dig through the ashes the next morning looking for any survivors. She'd end up with this big glob of melted candy called, what'd she call that stuff? Mary Honey Sen. Ugh. And their parents never did nothing about it neither. Their mother never liked Betsy because of her leg, and their father was such a tiny little guy he was afraid his wife would clobber him if he tried sticking up for her. That poor little kid, she just hated living there with all of them. She couldn't wait to graduate from high school so she could move out on her own and finally get away from all of them horrible, horrible people. So when she finally graduated, on the very same night, she scooped up all of her stuff and crammed it into one of Betsy's empty shoe boxes and snuck out in the middle of the night. But the only thing was, she didn't have nowheres to go. So she just walked around the streets till morning. And then people started giving her funny looks on account of her having such a noticeable limp. Because now that she was pretty much full grown, her one leg was about 6 inches shorter than the other one. Well, eventually she found this old wooden loading dock at the end of a dead-end alley behind a cucumber processing plant. And she asked the foreman if she could sleep underneath the dock, and he says, "Sure you can, kid. The rent's 25 cents a day." Well, Betsy had saved up a whole $1 of her own money, so she gave the big jerkies 2 bits for the day. She spent some more of it on a bunch of newspapers to sell in the street. But she got tired of people staring at her and teasing her about her limp. So she started selling the papers standing in the gutter. You know, one foot in the street and the other one up on the curb. But it turned out that was no good. Because for one thing, she could only sell papers to people that was walking in the one direction. And the other thing is that on rainy days, she kept getting soaked by the cars when they drive through the puddles. So then she found an old roller skate, and she screwed it to one side of a board that she found in the alley and made a kind of homemade skateboard out of it. But them metal skate wheels made so much of a racket, they gave her a terrible headache. So she decided to sneak back into her old house and steal one of Betsy's high platform shoes. And after practicing around with it for a few hours, she thought it worked real good. The best so far, even. But she still had another problem. You see, she was only making 20 cents a day selling papers. So not only was she short on the rent, she didn't have no money to buy no food neither. So she asked the cucumber man. That's what she called the foreman, the cucumber man. She asked him if there was any work she could do around the plant to make up the difference in rent, and he says,
"Sure, kid. You see that metal hatch on the wall over there next to where you sleep? That's the bottom of the furnace where we sweep all the cucumber scraps into. You clean them ashes out every day and we'll call it even Steven. All right?"
So Betsy starts cleaning out the ashes right away, and she finds a bunch of the cucumber scraps that didn't get burned up in the furnace, but were just kind of roasted a little. So she dug through all the ashes and kept the little scraps for something to eat, because she was already used to the ashes from the Halloween candy. Then she found a big glass jar in the corner of the alley to keep all of the scraps in. And then she did some odd jobs for an apple merchant in exchange for enough vinegar to fill up the jar. So the scraps wouldn't dry out or go bad before she could eat them all. But she was still a very hungry kid, because you could only eat so many pieces of cucumber, you know what I mean? Oh, listen to me rambling on and on about Betsy, and I ain't even told you nothing about Hank yet. Well, Hank was this guy that had a hot dog booth called Hank's Frank's. His place was right in front of the entrance of the alley where Betsy lived under the dock. And oh my goodness, oh my days, did Betsy have a crush on him? Oh, she was nuts about him. Her absolute favorite place to sell her papers was right across the street from Hank's booth, because he'd always send his customers over to buy their newspapers from her, and then he'd shoot her a friendly little smile that made her feel all warm and gushy. Oh, she wanted so bad to stand right next to his booth, but she was way too shy to talk to him, and she didn't want him to get a good look at her leg or know where she lived and all of that. That's why she waited for him to go home for the night before she'd go back home to her loading dock. But Hank's hot dog stand was one of those that you don't really move around a whole lot. You just leave him in one spot and lock it up every night. Oh, but it was torture for Betsy, because she could smell them dogs all night long, and she just had the little bits of roasted cucumbers to nibble on. But one night, she was so hungry that she just couldn't take it no more. So she went over to Hank's booth, picked the lock, and she went inside, and she stole one of the hot dogs. But she couldn't just take one and not try to do something for it in return. So she cleaned the whole place, top to bottom and inside and out, made the whole thing all shiny and new looking. And when Hank came back in the morning, he couldn't believe it. He looked around and asked a bunch of the people if they knew who done it, but nobody knew nothing. And then when he was counting the hot dogs, because he always kept real close track of his hot dogs, he noticed there was one missing. But he figured that whoever took it was probably the one who cleaned up the whole joint as payment, and he seemed to be okay with the whole thing. So every night, Betsy would sneak into Hank's booth for a hot dog, and then clean up the whole place or do something real nice for him. She even started leaving him little notes and poems telling him how cute and dreamy she thought he was. Ugh. But she only took one dog and one bun, nothing else. No mustard or ketchup or onions or nothing like that. She seemed to be satisfied with just slathering that cucumber gunk on him. But at this point, it was driving Hank nuts. He just had to figure out who was snazzing the place up at night and leaving those little love notes and stuff. So he decided to set a trap. You see, a while back, while Hank was setting up shop one morning, he saw a wooden crate fall off the back of a truck that was passing by. So Hank went and he checked it out, and it was about 30 cases of extra sticky flypaper. So he lugged it all back to his booth, and he thought that he could sell those things too. But he found out real quick that nobody wanted to think about flypaper when they was eating a hot dog. So he put the kibosh on that idea right away, and then he just saved the things for who knows what later on. Anyways, all of that to say that that's how he was going to set the trap, see? After he was done for the night, he put down a whole ton of that sticky stuff on the ground all around his booth, so that when the thief tried getting in, they'd get stuck real good. So when Betsy snuck out later that night to go get a hot dog, she got stuck in that flypaper. Both feet were stuck in there like glue. And she pulled and she pulled and she pulled, and she was able to get the one foot free, but her shorter leg, it wasn't as strong as the other one, see? So she just couldn't get that one loose. So she had to loosen the laces of that big platform shoe of hers and leave it behind, imprisoned in that nasty, goopy flypaper. And then the next day, when Betsy went to start selling the newspapers, she had to use that old noisy skateboard again. And she could see her platform shoe hanging from the side of Hank's booth like a condemned man hanging from the gallows. And he looked like he was asking everybody who it belonged to. So Betsy thought she better sell her papers a few blocks over just to be safe. And hopefully nobody would put the two and two together. But she finally got ratted out by one of the other newsies, and the kid told Hank where Betsy was staying. So Hank hid behind some trash in the alley by the loading dock and waited for her to come home. And when she finally came back, Hank stepped out from his hiding spot and confronted her. He says,
"Is this your shoe, doll?"
And she says, "Yeah, it's my shoe." And he says,
"Is you the one that's been stealing my hot dogs?"
And she says, "Yeah, it was me. I'm real sorry, but I was just so hungry." And he says,
"So you're the one who's been cleaning up my stand and leaving them sappy poems?"
So she says, "Yeah, that was me too." And he says,
"Well, why didn't you just ask me for a dog? I'd have given you as many as you wanted."
So she says, "I was too ashamed to ask yous. I didn't want yous to know about my leg and where I lived and all of that." And so he says,
"Are you kidding me? I don't care about none of that. I've been sweet on you since the first day I saw yous. But since you never said nothing to me, I thought you didn't want to have nothing to do with me."
and blah, 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 blah. They went on with all that mushy-gushy stuff all night. And the next day he says,
"Hey, why don't you give up the newspaper racket and come work with me selling hot dogs?"
And she says, "Oh, Hank, are you kidding me? I would love you. I mean, I would love to." Then Hank talked to his father and mother, and they said she could move in and sleep in his sister's room with his sister. So she wouldn't have to sleep under the loading dock no more. And then before you knew it, the two of them got married. Well, on the morning after the wedding, Betsy was making breakfast, and since they could still only afford hot dogs at the time, she cooked up a couple of them, and she slathered on that cucumber gunk of hers. And after Hank took the first bite, he says,
"Honey, this is delicious. What is this?"
And she told him about the whole thing and how she come to make it. And Hank says,
"Honey, we gotta sell this stuff. People will go nuts over this."
So she kept cleaning out the ashes at the cucumber plant and saving the scraps for her concoction. And they repainted and renamed the hot dog booth and called it Hank and Betsy's Cinderella hot dogs. And everybody loved them. They went nuts over them. But the name, it didn't really roll off the tongue, They'd say, "Hey, buddy, give me a Cinderella hot dog." It just felt too awkward to say. So people started saying, "Hey, buddy, let me get a Cinderella dog." So they renamed the booth again to Hank and Betsy's Frankfurter Palace, home of the Cinderella dog. And then when people found out that the relish was Betsy's recipe, everybody called it Cinderella, see? Da-da-da, that's where Cinderella comes from. So now you know. Now, don't that make a whole lot more sense than some dame turning into a princess and dancing with the prince every night and a bunch of magical hocus-pocus nonsense? When I tell you I'm going to set you straight, I set you straight, don't I? Anyway, well, Hank and Betsy made a real good living selling the dogs and relish. But what really brought in the dough later on is when Betsy asked Sprockets for help to improve a little skateboard thingy, and they came up with a design that the whole country went nuts over, and skateboarding became a new American phenomenon. No kidding. Well, that's it for now, kiddo. I hope you like that one. And now you can go and tell all your little friends that you know the real story of Cinderella. Now I gotta get going. I gotta take your Aunt Florence to see a probation officer. Ugh, never mind. It's a long story. I'll tell you another time. Well, anyway, I'll see you later, buddy. I miss you and I love you. Bye-bye.